Good afternoon, everyone. Just bear with us for a couple of moments as we allow participants to join. We do have close to 450 registered individuals, so please bear with us for maybe 20-30 seconds as we just let the numbers grow. Okay, the numbers are rising, but they've risen quite significantly, so we'll get going. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to part 2 of the Institute's Wellbeing series. My name, for those of you who haven't come across me hosting one of the Institute's webinars before, is Jonathan Barber. I'm the Institute's Head of Business Development. For those of you new to an Institute webinar, can I just run through a couple of housekeeping points? If we have any technical issues, we will look to resolve those as quickly and as efficiently as possible. Maybe though, if there is a sound issue or a connectivity issue, can you check your settings first? We have found from previous experience that it is individual settings rather than the Institute's Zoom webinar platform. But please, do check. But we hope we don't come across any technical issues as the session unfolds. Questions, observations, reflections. I think I mentioned this at the start of the first webinar we ran with Ro on and around wellbeing. Questions, observations and reflections, hugely important, I think, today. And of all the webinars we've run in the last 14 months, I think they're vitally important to this type of session. So I would encourage everybody, please ask your questions, please share your observations, please share your own experiences if you feel and want to with everybody. There is the Q&A facility or the chat box facility at either the top or the bottom of your screen, depending on how you're configured. But as I say, I think we learn today from each other. This is about everybody starting, continuing their own personal wellbeing journey, and those questions, those experiences, those reflections are vitally important. For those of you who didn't attend part 1 of this series, can I introduce Ro Kalicharan? Ro is an award-winning mental health campaigner and speaker. He has advised many companies on their wellbeing strategy, as well as being involved in a number of national campaigns to raise awareness around mental health. He has worked with the Football Association, Heads Together, and Kensington Palace, to name a few, and was last year named as a role model on the Inside Out Lead Board. That's a board that celebrates workplace leaders who are open about their experience of mental ill health. So Ro, again, welcome back. And it's a pleasure and a delight to have you join us today.
Thank you.
Can I start by maybe just recapping and thinking back to part 1, to a few weeks ago. It was great during that session, and it was great afterwards to receive a number of comments and numerous emails thanking you for your openness and your honesty in the story, the journey, the experiences that you as a as a child and as an adult have been through. So a delight to hear what you had to say, and I think the members, the non-members, the attendees really got some value from that first session, and I think we're very grateful. For me, it was your honesty. You opened up about your mental health journey. You weren't afraid to tell us, warts and all, the good, the bad, and the indifferent. And you really set I think, a very strong tone in the sense that you talked and you shared that journey. And I think some of the comments on the day back reflected that, because people were willing and people were able to share their journey and their experiences. So, thank you. Just my reflections there, Ro. I don't know whether, having given this some thought, you do a number of these sessions, whether there's anything that you would reflect back on or add to what I've said.
No, and look, it's an absolute pleasure to be here again, and I think apologies that there's been a 3 to 4 week delay, and actually, in that sense of being vulnerable about who we are and being true to who we are, I'll be very honest about the fact that I had to ask Jono and the Institute to actually postpone this, because I was going through a number of things at home with ill family health, and I knew full well that it was going to be detrimental to my own well-being and that of those around me, for me to commit to the original date. And I think hopefully that's a demonstration of me role modeling the things that I come on and say. And we'll talk about some of the more practical tools that we can talk about today. But my reflection from the first meeting was, I was very humbled by some of the messages that came up on the chat and some of the emails that I received afterwards. And all I'd say is it's so important for all of us to. I'll talk about things. I've talked about my journey. I'll talk about some of the ideas that we have in terms of how we can look after ourselves and each other. But the most important thing always to remember that your journey is your own, and you'll always see it through your lens. So it's really important to take the advice that you'll hear from me, the things that you'll hear from others, and think about how you apply it to your own life, because no one's going to ask you to be them. I'm definitely not going to ask you to be Rohan Kalicharan for the day and approach your mental well-being in the way that I do. But what I'll do is give you just some of the ideas around what the concept is, what the thought is. And I think, the most important thing is always reflect back at yourself. Reflect in the mirror, reflect back to yourself. Actually, how do I best look after my well-being using these tools? So I think, that's always my reflection coming away from these events is, okay, here are some ideas, but you need to take them away and think about how they apply to you.
Yeah. Okay. Now, Ro, I suppose today it is about moving that story on, and I think you've just talked about maybe providing members with tools around the signs of understanding more the mental health challenges that they or family or colleagues may face. I think you've also talked about, or you've mentioned that you'll also provide some thoughts and ideas about how we start conversations. And I know you're always keen to look at how we challenge the stigma about not being vulnerable, crikey, can't spit my words out there, so apologies, how we shouldn't be vulnerable about speaking about, our own well-being and our own mental health. So, again, I think it'll be a very interesting session. And I know you're not using slides again, you're talking from the heart, and you're talking about your practical experiences, thoughts and suggestions today. Actually, maybe the way that we've postponed for a couple of weeks probably has helped, because I think it's allowed people to reflect. You take the fact that what we had the UK Mental Health Awareness Week last week. So actually, that probably brings the subject into people's minds and focus a little bit more. And I know the theme of the week was around nature and the environment. And probably the last 14 months we've found ourselves in, I think nature and being able to experience and enjoy nature and the environment when possible has become extremely prevalent. So a very good thing from those who came up with it and who ran and controlled the week. So look, enough from me. As you start to talk, I know it's great. There are a number of people who've already put something in the chat or the Q&A facility. As I listen, I will interject where I think.
Please do. And I think you've already touched on some of the themes that will a lot of these themes will automatically very easily blend into each other as well.
Yeah, good. Okay, I'll look at some of the chat comments just in case there's anything there that's already really pertinent to raise. If people are kindly saying hi to myself and Ro, well, that's great. Hi back to everybody who's added a comment. But Ro, enough from me. Over to you, and we look forward to hearing what your thoughts are this afternoon.
Okay, so look, again, thank you for having me, and it's just a privilege to be joining you again. It was a privilege a few weeks ago to share my own journey of mental illness, my own journey of thriving through recovery to the place where I am now as an HR leader, and as a mental health campaigner and advocate. And I think today's session was always going to be to really take a step back from that, and let's think about I think John has already talked about what are the stigma, what are our approaches, what are our attitudes to mental health, and then actually let's talk about some of the practical things that we can do to look after our own well-being and actually start conversations with others around our own well-being. And actually, one of the first things I wanted to mention, I love the fact that this conversation, this session, the title of it is around well-being, and it's not around mental health, because actually our well-being is, our mental health is a very important subset of our well-being. And actually, when I talk about stigma, when you think about stigma, actually, it is mental health and mental illness, which has so often been the phrase, the term that's created that kind of stigma, the kind of fear, the kind of barrier, the kind of things that we just don't want to talk about. When we hear the phrase mental health, immediately that barrier comes down. When we hear the phrase mental health, we immediately start thinking around mental illness. We start thinking about anxiety, depression, bipolar, whatever that may be. And immediately that leads to barriers to open conversation. And I think when we, it's so important as we move through the pandemic, as we move further through this, the 21st century that we're in, that we continue to reframe the language and we really do focus on speaking about well-being. And we can talk about mental well-being, we can talk about physical well-being, but actually all of this blends into our holistic, and that's a word I always use, holistic, our total well-being. because actually we're not talking about a Venn diagram here where our physical health and our mental health overlap. It's not, it's not a Venn diagram. It's a full circle, which is our well-being, and our physical well-being and our mental well-being both fit fully inside that circle as subsets of it. And actually, if our physical well-being or our mental well-being isn't right, that means it automatically impacts on our full holistic well-being. And that's how we need to start thinking about it. It's not about physical health and mental health. It's actually about our full well-being, and actually our mental well-being feeds so importantly into that. So, and I think when we begin to look at that, we begin to understand some of the themes that have come through during the pandemic, and actually some of the things that we're going to have to think about over these coming weeks and months as we make the transition back from fully remote working back to potentially going back into your own office, potentially having to visit client offices, and so on and so forth. What are the anxieties that that's going to actually create, for you, for others around you, as actually you come out of the bubble of having been fully working remotely? Let's perhaps start with the remote working bubble first. What are the things that we've learned around mental well-being and, around our well-being during that time? I suppose one of the things that I've been so aware of is the need for us to create boundaries. And that's physical boundaries and mental boundaries. And by the way, these are things that we're going to have to continue doing as the world evolves to, whether it's fully back in the office or a hybrid state, we have to continue doing that. So what are the tips for how we do that? One of the things that, I've been really, really focused on doing during the pandemic is to make sure that I really do create a physical space for work. And again, my wife and I are really lucky that we do have the space, that she's been able to work in our kitchen. I've been able to work in our spare bedroom, so that we've not at any point in time been taking, work into our living space, into our sleeping space. And, I think it sounds so simple, but it's so important as you continue to work at home to create that boundary between where you work and where you live, because otherwise, you've got such a blur, and actually your living space, your relaxation space becomes a place that you associate with work. But actually your mental boundaries are so important as well. At the start of the day, at the end of the day, what are the things that you're able to do to actually create that space between work and you, that you might do in your commute sometimes, whatever you would normally do. And some of the ideas for me are, and I happen to be a runner, so I in the morning will get up, I'll go for a run, and although I'm coming back to the same place, I'm leaving home, I'm going out for a run and coming back, that's the way that I've separated being at home to being at work. For some people, it might just be stepping into their living room and reading a book or listening to a podcast for 10, 15 minutes. For some, it might be going for a walk, going for a cycle. For some, it might just be, that peaceful reflection, having a coffee in the morning before you start work. But whatever you do, the key is to ensure that we're not going in this cycle of literally waking up, going to the bathroom, having a shower, and being at our desk, having coffee at my in my home office while I'm opening my email, getting down to work, and then actually, by the time you realize it, you're into your working day, and literally you've got out of bed and walked a few meters to work without anything to actually acclimatize your mind into that state. you could say the same about lunch. And again, you know, I found it easier at home to ensure that I take that step away from you know, from my work. I've not done the classic, yeah, I'm going to eat, I'm going to have lunch at my desk on the go. Actually, you know, the joy of being able to work at home with my wife has enabled us to say, yeah, we are going to step away for half an hour and just sit down together and have lunch every day. And it's so important that we build in that kind of break. It doesn't have to necessarily be at lunch, but again, it's a really long time to go from 8 in the morning to 6 in the evening without just stepping away to clear your mind. So again, so important that we build in that space. The mind can't cope with being switched on constantly. We don't have at the moment that whole piece of, I'm going to my client here, and then I've got a 15-minute walk to go to my next client, or a 50, you know, or a half an hour, you know, taxi or train to go to my next client, or some time back in the office to work before speaking to a client. It feels like we're constantly going between meetings right now. And, you know, what we do to actually create boundaries at the start of the day, during the day, and at the end of the day is so particularly important, Jono. I think, you know, at the end of the day, you know, again, so important to step out, go for a walk, or, you know, read a book, do something, start cooking, you know, do anything you can just to take your mind away from that work, that constant. We've been speaking for years about that constantly switched on culture, but it's become even worse, obviously, because we're switched on in the same place where we're trying to relax and live as well.
Yeah, no, Ro, I wholeheartedly agree with you. I think the lines have become blurred in the last 14 months because the vast majority of us have worked from home for all or part some of that period. You know, I listen to some of the things that you're talking about, and I'm sort of giving myself a slap on the wrist with some of the things you're suggesting, or thinking, making a mental note to actually action those. But then there are some of the other things that you're talking about. You know, I'm fortunate. We have a dog, and you know, every morning when I get up, I take the dog for a walk. Now, I always enjoy that, you know, because it's time to just think. It's a time to, you know, to sort of be, you know, to feel glad for what we have, what I have around me. So that's always my good start to the day. And it really doesn't matter whether it's a glorious sunny day or it's raining. That's a good start for me. But you're absolutely right. Creating space and having breaks, I think, is hugely important. So I'd wholeheartedly agree with you there. Just you know, sort of comment or I suppose an observation already, which sort of partly becomes right back to the beginning. And somebody's, you know, Michael, thank you. You've commented. To me, it seems that there are two initial steps, essential steps. The first is to acknowledge and admit to ourselves that we have struggles. The second is considering to whom we talk. You know, so I would wholeheartedly agree with that. If we're not open and honest enough with ourselves, how could we then be open and honest with whoever we believe are the people we might want to speak?
Yeah.
But you know, Ro, from your experience and story from the first session, I'm sure you'd have a thought and a comment on what Michael's saying there.
Oh, so true. And I think you know, we talk about mindfulness, and what does mindfulness really mean? I mean, mindfulness in its purest state is, you know, very much accepting where you are in that in that very split second of time. And actually, yeah, I think it's so important. And I'm obviously aware that I'm working with a big a big team. I've got I'm part of a team of 13 in a company of, in a company of 300 headcount. I'm also aware that a lot of you are sole practitioners, or that that you are small organizations. And again, you've not got that, that comfort zone around you, those people to bounce off. And, I know that some of the things I might be able to talk about here won't necessarily be relevant, but, say for us as a team, what we've been really conscious about doing is doing check-ins with each other. And even at the start of every remote meeting, we'll just ask everyone, okay, 1 to 10, type in the chat box how you are. No questions answered. No questions asked, no questions answered. If you're a 0 out of 10, no one's going to ask you why, but we are just going to acknowledge that in that moment you're not having a great day, and actually we will have less expectation of how you might contribute to that meeting, or of the impact that you might have. Again, encouraging people. You know what? If you're not having a great day, you don't have to turn your camera on. Turn your camera off. We can all, speak. We can all still hear your voice. So, feel empowered. It's about empowering yourself and empowering the people around you. And actually, that comes from setting the tone. As a leader, what do I do? As a small business owner, how are you going to set the tone for the people who work with you? By role modeling it. And, it is role modeling that vulnerability. It's me coming into a team meeting on a Monday, and it's saying, okay, guys, you know what? I am going to be positive here. But the reality is, yeah, I'm not in the best place I've ever been. I'm probably a 4 out of 10. But I'm lucky that I've got you guys around me, and we're gonna get on, and we're gonna do things to the best of our ability today. And I think admitting that vulnerability, Michael, you're absolutely spot on. It's the first thing is self-recognition, saying, all right, today is not a great day. Then the second piece is absolutely right. Who am I going to speak to about it? Do I need to speak to someone about it? And number 3 is, what are the things that I can actually do which are going to give me life during that day? What are the things that are actually going to convert that day from a 4 to a 7? And actually, if not, what are the tools and mechanisms I have to at least sustain myself through a 4 out of 10 day? So I think, you're adding more questions there. You're saying, okay, how do I actually go from a 4 in the morning to a 7 at lunch? And if I don't believe there's a way to do that, fine. How am I going to sustain myself healthily through being a 4? Which is, we're all capable of doing, but it's just about stepping away and understanding what our expectations of ourselves are.
Yeah. Michael's also followed on with, and this is interesting, in a way, do we need to develop disciplines in ourselves, and also maybe, culturally within business, about not feeling the need to immediately, as an example, reply or respond to an email? Or do we also create the discipline in ourselves whereby for a certain time during the day, we turn off our phone?
Yeah, look, it's a magnificent question, and I think there are again, so much of this will come down to driving a culture within the organisation, or setting the ground rules. And one of the things we do, we say to I say to my direct reports, I will tell you if it's urgent, but otherwise, I don't expect an immediate response. If I'm messaging you for something, it's just to let you know, yeah, this is something that does need to be looked at, but I will put it in the subject line if it's something that needs to be looked at yesterday. And I think it's so important. Well, yes, you're absolutely right. We need to empower people not to be feeling they need to respond, because that just breaks productivity in a time when productivity is already so broken by constantly switching from one video call to the next. So I think that's a massive and really, really good point. What are the other things we can do again in that regard is, talk about switching off notifications, whether it be on, whether you use a collaboration tool like Slack, whether it's on your email, just switching it off for a period of time and letting the people who need to know that it's off, putting your out of office on, just to say I'm unavailable during this period of time, but will respond to messages during a certain window. Absolutely right. I think the key thing for you is, what your stakeholders, i.e. your clients, your stakeholders or managers, what their style is. Are they going to be panicking if they're not getting a response? And that's where actually we can take an ownership in terms of what we say in our out of office message, etc. We can either say, okay, I'm not here until 9 a.m. tonight, or we can say, I'm out of the office this afternoon and I will respond to all messages, I'll respond to all urgent messages during a set window of time. And again, it's around setting expectations for yourself, but setting expectations for others. Because when you're setting clear expectations for others, you're stripping the anxiety away from yourself. The biggest problem we have is, the reason we constantly go into our inbox is we're anxious that people are waiting for a response. If we tell people, whether it's by an out of office or any kind of quick return message, I will respond to this at XYZ, we've already stripped away our anxiety and we've given them a clear expectation.
A couple of thoughts and reflections from members. Great, thank you, Ian. Ian plays the guitar, and he actually has one, as he says on the Q&A, by his desk. He will regularly pick that up in between talking to clients or moving on to the next job. So, you mentioned podcast, coffee, walk, run, whatever it be. That's another great example, and it obviously works for Ian. Nadine, thank you. She's agreeing with you, Ro, I think, here, in the sense, from bed to shower to coffee at the desk, definitely a formula for burnout.
Nadine, thank you. Yeah, it's so true. And again, at the other end of the day, from work to dinner table to bed, it's a real, that's how people are getting burnt out.
Yeah. The not the reverse, but slightly the reverse of what Nadine has said, whereby, Judy mentions, well, how do I get into the mindset to actually not feel you need to get ahead of the day and fall out of bed with a cup of tea at your desk? She has gone on, though, to say that, she's tried several times to do a mindfulness session or maybe 15 minutes of something like Pilates. So, anything that you would say around the first point she makes about how do you get into the mindset, Ro?
Yeah, look, I think I alluded to it in the first talk, and one of the things I always think about are our fruit and veg for mental well-being, because we always talk about nutrition for our physical health, and actually let's talk about how we feed our mental well-being, and where I'm going with this, and this feeds in to this question, but it also feeds into the boundaries piece. Okay, so what we constantly do as individuals, we create this false state of anxiety, and how we do that, it's because we're constantly worrying about yesterday or what's gone on earlier today, and worrying about what's going to happen this afternoon or tomorrow. So we're constantly looking back and we're constantly looking forward. And actually, we're doing very, very little of living in the now, living in the present moment. Joy comes from living in the present. And, you know, what are the things that we need to do to strip away that anxiety is actually, yeah, find those things which allow you to have, whether it's, you know, 5 minutes, 5 hours, what are the things that allow you just to step away from that anxiety, that treadmill of worrying about what's looking back, worrying about looking forward. Let's just look at the here and now and think, yeah, you know what? I'm just enjoying this walk. I'm enjoying playing this tune. I'm enjoying this chapter. I'm enjoying this run. I'm enjoying this moment of nothingness. And you know, that's how we, number one, let's go back right to the start of this session. That's how we create the boundary at the start of each event of each day. Because actually find that activity which says, I'm stepping away from work, I'm stepping away from anxiety, and I'm just going to do something which feeds me and allows me to step into the moment of life. And actually that answers the question, what do I do to prepare myself, to get myself? Actually, you know, wake up and actually recharge. Allow, you know, any, you know, nearly any engine, an engine, you switch the key on, it doesn't purr, it needs to rev. And actually, you know, you need to give yourself that time in the morning to actually be able to purr at work. And that means, again, whatever you do, finding that activity which, for whether it's for 5 minutes, half an hour, allows you just to be in the state of mind for the day ahead and not just jumping straight into it, because that's when the engine's going rev, making a hell of a lot of noise. You're trying to go from 0 to 100 in 5 seconds, which our mind can't really process, instead of actually just building into the day.
You know, it's very true, very true. I think the thing that we're not good at, are we, as human beings, or many of us aren't good at though, Ro, is how do we start a conversation with a family member, a friend, a colleague? Paul has commented that, you know, it's great to see the subject of well-being being focused in upon by the Institute, but many people don't choose to say anything. Many people don't open up. So how, as individuals, in your opinion and from your experience, how can we try to start conversations? Or, I think you covered this in maybe your own journey with some of the...
Well, I suppose the question is, but it's two ways. How do we start conversations about our own well-being, but actually, how do we start conversations with a family member or a friend about theirs? The two meet in the middle, actually, but you know, let's start about our own well-being. Let me break down, you know, some myths. Let's just, you know, be really clear about this. Being vulnerable or asking for help doesn't make you a burden on someone. It doesn't make you weak, and it doesn't make you a failure. I think let's just get that straight out the way and done with. Actually, being brave enough to turn around and say, I'm not feeling great, takes a lot of strength. It takes a lot of character. It takes a lot of courage. And, you know, I think, first of all, let's just break down those myths. It's a positive thing to be vulnerable. It's a positive thing to ask for help. I think let's go back as well to that whole framing piece around talking about well-being or talking about mental health. If I turn around to you and say, you know what, I'm feeling really, I've been feeling constantly tired at the moment. I've not really had much energy. I'm feeling a bit withdrawn, not seeing, you know, too much of my friends. I'm feeling, you know, I've not felt like hanging out with people. I just don't feel great. actually, you're not talking and you're not turning around and saying, I've got a mental health problem. All you're turning around and saying is, actually, have you noticed? You're just saying, have you noticed that I've not been myself recently? Or you're just kind of like, you're starting a conversation to say, actually, I've not felt myself. That's the first step, because actually you're getting that off your chest, you're admitting it to yourself, and you're actually inviting someone else on that journey.
Mm.
There could be any number of reasons for that. And that's where the self-reflection comes in. That will be, for me to be able to say, over these recent months, I know I've not been myself because, as I said, we've had family ill health. I've been working long hours. We've not been able to see our families and friends. Actually, I know I found it difficult, but I know also that that doesn't mean mental ill health. And I think, again, that's where being able to reframe the piece, mental ill health versus well-being, is so important. Talking about well-being, it's a really, really natural thing to be able to do. It's what we do all the time. We ask the question, how are you? And we genuinely mean it. The problem is, over the years, we've found it very difficult to take it to actually process a response where someone says, actually, I'm not very well. And that's what we've got to really, this is where our improvement, has to come. It's to be able to say, actually, you know what, I'm not feeling great right now. And actually, similarly, to be able to know what to do when someone tells you they're not feeling great. And look, I'll give you examples of, some of the friends I speak to at different times. I always talk of 3 friends who I will reach out to if I know I'm having a difficult time. I've got one, and he happens to be an accountant. And I met him while we were doing our SEMA studies together. He's now a financial analyst, and he's quite forensic in the way that he'll want the detail. Why are you feeling like that? When did it start? How did it, how's it making you feel? How's it impacting? So if I actually want to really talk about things and really try and break it down in my own mind, he's a perfect person to go to, because he'll actually force me to reflect, force me to think, force me to speak. I've got another mate who, and luckily we can start doing this again, can't we? Who I'll just ring up and say, yeah, let's go for a beer, let's go and watch some football. Because he'll talk about absolutely anything to avoid the subject. But again, it's that whole piece I talked about, living in the moment and stepping away from the anxiety of everything else that's going on. And eventually the conversation will normally lead there anyway. And then I've got another friend who happens to be a she, but she's the one who'll always turn around and say, all right, Rose, do I have to be worried about your mental health, or actually are you like everyone else, just having a really crap day? And again, she forces me just into that whole thought process of reflecting about, why I'm feeling, how I'm feeling, and actually, yeah, is this something worse than just having a difficult time as we do? Is this something that's been going on actually for longer than a few days, longer than a week? Is this something that's unusual, out of character? Is this something that, is just really playing on my mind and I can't get rid of? It's having those normal conversations with friends, which will allow you to really, number one, speak to other people, which is so important. Be vulnerable, which is so important. And actually have that sense of comfort in your mind that you've got other people in your corner, and actually be able to know, do I need to go elsewhere for professional help? What do I need to do to help take the next steps?
All right. Okay. That's your journey has taken you from a place where I think, from reflection on part 1, you didn't know who to talk to or where to go to, or when you did go to seek let me call it professional advice. It sounded to begin with that you were sort of palmed off or told, oh, not to worry about this. So you, over many years, have obviously developed an understanding in yourself as to how to cope.
Yeah.
And also, you've developed a close network, and you talk about the three friends there around you who you can turn to. And in their differing ways, I'm assuming they also ask you, and you talk often. For those, though, who are sat there today, and I'm one myself.
Yeah.
So, for example, I love my rugby, and I listen to a couple of rugby-led podcasts on a weekly, fortnightly basis. But there was one last week that I listened to, and I think this was linked to, the awareness week that we were in last week, whereby the presenter was interviewing a fellow rugby player who has since come out and said that they had well-being health issues.
Mm-hmm.
But the interviewer turned around and said, well, I played with you for years. I had no idea.
Yeah.
How did you keep it hidden for so long? What could I have looked for? What could I have asked you? Or when somebody says to you, how are you feeling, Ro? And you turn around and say, yeah, all right, I'm fine, thanks. And Jonathan says, oh, that's great. Ro's all right. Move on.
Keep on asking. If I know that you're palming me off, I'm just going to keep on asking. I'm genuinely going to keep on asking. And look, it's not flippant. You have got to be resilient in terms of it may take a while knocking at the door for someone to be totally open with you. It's about building trust. It's about that trust as a friend of saying, sometimes we do have to take the bull by the horns and say, look, Jono, I've noticed that you've seemed really tired. You probably, I saw you snap at someone, which you never do. I haven't seen him snap at anyone, by the way. This is just an example. Or, you've just not seen quite your happy self. You don't have to tell me about it now and tell me to butt out if you want to. But, just if you want a mate, if you want a beer, if you want to walk, chat, just let me know. First time, I expect Jono to say, yeah, I'm fine, don't worry, mate. Jono will probably go away, and at some point tonight, listening to his podcast, or tomorrow, he'll think, oh, you know what, Ro actually really, he cares. I might be able to trust him to speak to, and actually I could really do with speaking to him about this, so I might. But tomorrow he'll forget. So what I'll do, I'll pick up the phone to him a week later and just say, mate, how you doing? Are you, are you feeling it? You're still feeling a bit tired, kind of thing. And you just keep knocking on the door till that point of trust comes where he says, actually, you know what? I'm not great. Fancy a talk? And I'm not saying that it will work that cleanly every time, but it's not about rocket science here. It's about being human. It is about being a friend. It's about asking people how they are. But it's in the same moment being able to honestly say why you've seen that they're not themselves. Because it's too easy just to say, oh, you're not yourself at the moment. Oh, I'm fine. No, you've got to be able to at least articulate to that person, why you're worried about them without actually sending them into a tailspin. So again, it's a delicate balance, but for me to be able to say, I've seen there are certain things different from usual. That shouldn't send them into a tailspin. I hope I've been able to articulate that.
No, you have. I think it's observing who is around you, who is around you. It's also, obviously, from what you're saying, it's about asking the questions. It's continuing to ask those questions, or it's about following up in the right way with people who you feel.
Of course it is. I talked about the 1 to 10 check-ins that we use for our internal meetings.
Yeah.
And I said, there's no questions asked, no questions answered. However, if one of my team continually for 3-4 weeks checks in 1 to 4, between 1 and 4 out of 10, and if that person is normally fairly well, groomed or whatever, and is suddenly carrying a beard bigger than me and not, not themselves, then I would at some point just, have a chat. And, again, it would be an out of work context. Just go for a walk, pick up the phone to them and say, look, mate, I've noticed that that you've been saying in your check-ins that you're not feeling the best. And actually, I love the new stubble, but I just wanted to check you're okay. And it really is. It comes down to being human and being a friend.
Okay. Thank you for that. Do you also, Ro, I'm conscious of your time of the time, but I think one of the other things you were keen to focus in upon, and you might have started to do this, but you might want to, just sort of focus for a couple of minutes a little bit more about, challenging some of the stigmas that there seem to be around being vulnerable, around one's mental well-being. Do you want to just sort of give a few thoughts to that before I then open it up, so that if people have got some specific questions, observations or comments, they can send those through, and we can cover those off.
Well, look, there's 225 people on this call, which means essentially that if you believe the statistics, around 55 people will be impacted by mental ill health this year on this call. That's a lot of people. Okay. However, that doesn't begin to tell the story. What about your friends? What about your family? What about your colleagues that are impacted? The reality is there's not a single one of us. I defy anyone to tell me that they have not been impacted by mental ill health in their lives, whether it's them, whether it's anyone else around them. And I think, from that perspective, when you look at it in that context, it's so important for us to be able to step away and actually realize, this isn't just about me. This is about, something that's impacting all of us. And actually, how do we ensure that we are supporting each other through it as a society, as communities, as friends, as employers, as families? And yeah, the stigma is still there, but actually we've done a hell of a lot to step away from the times that we lived through. We've spoken about Jono so many times. I lived undiagnosed for 15 years because actually back then I did ask for help. I was told, oh, don't worry, you're just being, a boy, a teenager growing up. So actually I never asked for help again, because by that point, you realize, oh, you're in this masculine, toxic masculine world where it's a show of weakness if you ask for help. Whereas actually now we've got more role models in public life who are making it very clear that none of us are immune to this, that, mental ill health or, challenges around our mental well-being do not for any moment of time mean that we are a failure, mean that we are weak, or mean that our life is going to be compromised for a long period of time. And, I think hopefully by people like myself, being able to demonstrate that actually you can live, you can thrive, you can recover, you can come through the other end, we are beginning to break down those barriers around mental ill health. I certainly think now that actually the problem we have societally is more about knowledge, it's more about resource, and less around the actual stigma around mental ill health.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think the number of ongoing campaigns and the continual building of awareness of this subject matter, will only continue to grow, which is absolutely as it should be. Can I just ask our audience, there might be specific questions, there might be observations, personal reflections you want to share. Probably now is a good time to do so. So please, through the chat or the Q&A facility, please do that. Can I say to Anthony, who has kindly messaged through the chat that he would be happy and willing to provide support, and one of the reasons he would be willing to provide support is he is a recovering alcoholic, 25 years continuous sobriety now, one day at a time.
Great job. Well done. And thank you for sharing. Thank you for being vulnerable. Takes a hell of a lot of character and courage to do that.
So thank you, Ro. Thank you, Anthony. Anthony, can I pick up with you outside of this webinar? I'd be delighted in talking to you about how you found helping others has helped you and how we might put that into practical use. So thank you. Ro, a comment or a question here. Thank you, Mohammed. Do we have to seek professional help, or is there any course of action we can take ourselves to deal with mental health?
Sorry, rephrase.
Yeah. Do we have to seek professional help, or is there any course of action we can take ourselves to deal with mental health?
Yeah, look, we absolutely, and again, actually, let's take this back to the whole piece around well-being and mental illness. So actually, well-being is a subset of our health, and we can absolutely take ownership of that. So getting out into nature, exercising, sleeping, making sure that we're not isolated, those are all things that we can control, and they make our well-being much better. It doesn't mean, however, that we won't experience mental ill health. And actually, it's at the time when we experience mental ill health, of course, then we will need some kind of professional support. But actually, in terms of maximizing our mental well-being, that's what we can take ownership for. Let me give, we talked about the fruit and veg, okay? Eating healthily, exercising, sleeping well. They're all things actually people talk about for our physical health, aren't they? It doesn't mean that by looking after our physical health that we are suddenly immune to flu, COVID, or worse. We can do all the things right, but we could still get ill. However, the healthier we are, we know we have more chance of overcoming that illness because we've built that type of resilience. Exactly the same is true of our mental well-being. When we start looking at those fruit and veg that I spoke about for our mental well-being, making sure that we are, again, exercising, sleeping, or doing that thing once a day which takes us away from that place of anxiety to maximize our wellness resilience. That actually means, again, it doesn't mean that we're not going to experience mental ill health at some point, but we're going to have so much stronger and so much better a resilience toolkit to actually deal with it when it comes. And again, I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, thanks, Ro. Mental well-being has been one of the biggest challenges my team has faced over the past year. Keeping them focused has been a challenge, as it was important as the line manager to remain sensitive whilst managing the workload requirements. What are the tools you would recommend to continue to manage this balance?
Yeah, look, I think, when we're talking about looking after our team, and that could be a whole new, that's a whole session in itself. But it really is. It's kind of like, how do we do that? How do we maintain productivity and well-being at the same time? I think it's number one, you've always got to have a pulse on how your team is doing. So we've already talked about those 1 to 10 check-ins. But again, keep an eye on, are people working ridiculously long hours? How are people displaying in team meetings? Are there certain clients who certain of your team have who are more demanding at a certain period of time as you go in and come out of tax year end and so on and so forth, which you'll have all done recently? What's been the impact of that on people? So how are we making sure that people are kind of like being able to step away and create those boundaries? What are we doing as a company to say, okay, you know what, I know you've put that in, and how are we making sure that people switch off? How are we creating those boundaries for them by saying, actually, I really do need you, and role modeling it as a leader. I need you to switch off in the evening. I need you to switch off at weekend in order to be, your most productive and healthy self. Because actually, the cost to you as a business of ill health is and absenteeism is much more than actually, that the product, the minimized productivity you have from someone who's exhausted. So I think it's a common sense approach. Again, it doesn't have to be high technology here. It's encouraging people to moderate their hours, ensuring that you as a leader help to create clear goals for them, clear objectives, clear boundaries, and actually just making sure that you are role modeling what you say you will do.
Thank you. I'm going to read this as it's put, Ro, and to the audience, so I hope you don't mind, but I think everybody will get the gist. What do you do if your partner thinks all of this is a load of bleep, 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 and says to man up?
Yeah, man up. That's one of what the old phrase, and one of the worst around. And what do you do? I think that's at that point where hopefully you can actually, being really blunt, rely on other friends who you can speak to, other friends who might be able to influence your partner to say, well, actually, you know what, it's not about your partner manning up. Your partner actually needs support, not criticism at the moment. So it's kind of like, actually step away, because in that moment in time, that response is doing you more harm than good. And actually look to, who can I speak to who can give me the support, give me the ideas that I might need in terms of who I can approach, and actually at the right time, be able to speak to your partner and say, well, actually, look, that response really hasn't helped me, and we are living in an era way beyond phrases like man up, where actually we appreciate that workloads, toxic expressions of masculinity like that, and mental illness, it's a well proven thing, and we need to actually step away from telling people, there's nothing wrong with you, just man up and get on with it. But I think in answer to the question, it's actually initially speak to people who will listen and support, and actually when the time's right, either by yourself or with the support of someone else, bring some gentle challenge back to your partner to explain why that approach isn't helpful.
Yeah. Okay. I think I've got this next question sorted in my head. So I'm somebody who understands the mechanisms for creating space and taking a break, but I can't find the motivation to take the time out and actually do it. Are there any ways of addressing this, Ro? Good question, I've got to say.
It does eventually come down to holding yourself accountable and discipline, and actually remembering, really almost writing down, whether it's on your fridge door or anywhere, what are the benefits of better well-being, what the cost of neglecting it is, how much worse and how much more lethargic you feel when you aren't doing the things to feed you, and almost writing down what are the things that benefit. Almost do your profit and loss, do your balance sheet of, what 5 minutes of nature outside, 5 minutes of run, 5 minutes of walk will give you about 60 minutes of benefit back in the workplace. And similarly, losing that 5 minutes off your ledger there is probably going to take hours of productivity away on the other side. Think about it as a ledger. I really, really kind of like challenge yourself to be accountable in that regard, and just always remember, actually, I have to do this for the good.
It's a really interesting one, and I think it's about taking personal control.
And by the way, you ask my wife, I don't always do it very well.
Yeah, no, I'm sure there are many of us who have in our heads the knowledge, or we work out the plan, but then we don't action it because of something else cropping up. But I'm conscious of time, and I'm going to bring us to a close in a couple of minutes, Rose. So thank you. There are a number of questions that have been asked that I don't know whether those people missed the first session or maybe missed the start of today's session, but I do feel those questions have been covered. And what we will do within the next 24 hours is send an email to all attendees sharing the recordings of both session 1 and session 2. We will also include a link to the Institute's COVID-19 page, and there is a general resources page within that does cover certain areas of well-being, health, mental health. So it's something for people to maybe look at further. Ro, this is naughty of me, and I do apologise, but we go back a few years. I think the response after the first session and today's session is overwhelmingly telling me that people have valued this, and that they see this as an important subject matter for the Institute to continue to offer help and support in. Can I pick up with you post this to maybe look at dates for the future of coming back? And
I'd be delighted to. And any of the questions you've received that we've not addressed that you feel are actually really important to, I'm happy that we can address offline for those people as well. But I'd be delighted to come, and again, there's so many things we can speak about. Today's just been simple tools about you as individuals. We've not really even gone into too much of the workplace stuff. There's so much we can do about how do you support your business, how do you support your families. There's so much that we can do. But look, my message to all of you will be, really listen to yourselves, listen to your own body clock and battery, and really just always be true to your instinct. If your instinct tells you, I'm exhausted, I'm not feeling great, it's probably because you're exhausted and not feeling great, and take steps.
Yeah, thank you, Ro. There are a couple of other messages that I will pick up on outside of today's event. Thank you, Richard, for your note. I'll pick up on that. I also know there have been a couple of members and attendees who've reminded me and offered their support. I will link all of that together when I'm speaking to Ro and looking at a future event or a follow-on event. This is a subject that obviously resonates with members, is important, And as your institute, we need to ensure that we're providing you with not only technical support, but support in areas such as this. So we will run future webinars on this particular and around this particular subject matter.
But as you know, as a mental health campaigner, for me, it's so encouraging to hear the Institute say that as well.
Thank you, Ro. Thank you, though, from me to you. It's a pleasure to have had you provide two valuable, insightful, and wonderfully open and honest sessions. So thank you. That's from me, that's from the Institute, but I could read the number of thank yous. Thank you for the help. Thank you for the insights. Thank you for the tools, the suggestions. Thank you for the two presentations. That's from attendees. That means far more to me, and as I'm sure it does to you. So thank you.
They're all you're all very welcome. And look, I really look forward to hearing how you've been able to implement them into your lives.
Thank you, Ro. To all of you who've attended, thank you for doing so. Please look after yourselves. Please do make contact with us if there's something that you need that your institute could support you with. And we look forward to covering this subject in other ways, in more detail, taking particular aspects of it in the future. Have a good afternoon. Have a good rest of the week. Thank you very much indeed all. Take care.
Thank you for having me.
Bye-bye.